Before anything, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. And leave a comment down below. Because what I'm about to tell you might just change the way you see love, loyalty, and yourself. Have you ever found yourself emotionally starving, even while lying next to someone who swears they love you? I know, that sounds harsh, but emotional betrayal doesn't always come dressed in passion or scandal. Sometimes it walks in quietly, and you don't hide. That's what happened to me. And if you think infidelity is just about bodies and bedsheets, this story is going to flip your reality upside down. I never thought I'd be the woman telling a story like this, a true emotional story wrapped in silences, more powerful than shouts. But one night, something broke, and something woke up. And from that moment on, I started living a cinematic confession. One that unfolded not in chaos, but in stillness, vulnerability, and the dangerous territory of an emotional affair. This isn't about shame. It's about truth. The kind of truth most women keep buried behind perfect dinners and polite smiles. So, if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever craved a connection beyond desire, or if you've questioned whether love without attention is really love at all, then stay with me, because this isn't just a story, it's a mirror, and maybe you'll see yourself in it too. It was late, one of those nights where silence wraps around the house like a secret. I stood in front of the mirror, peeling off the day, layer by layer. The bathroom light was soft, almost forgiving, and for a moment, I allowed myself to just see, not just my body, but the woman underneath all the roles. The wife, the mother, the professional. It wasn't vanity. It was a quiet rediscovery of a self I thought I'd left behind. You know, but strange, how something as ordinary as undressing can become a true emotional story when you're really present. My reflection wasn't just skin and shadow. It held something more, something I couldn't ignore. Mirror symbolism, a flicker of longing in my own eyes. Not for someone, but for connection, for emotional intimacy. The kind that slowly fades when routine replaces attention. There was no sadness, just a soft ache, like remembering a song you used to love, but haven't heard in years. That night wasn't about infidelity. Not yet. It was about the silent yearning that builds over time. A kind of betrayal without betrayal. The emotional distance between two people who still sleep in the same bed, but stopped seeing each other. I missed being noticed, not just spoken to over dinner, not touched on schedule. I missed feeling alive in someone's gaze. And when I caught myself leaning in toward the mirror, studying my face like it held some forgotten secret, I knew something had shifted. It wasn't about escaping. It was about awakening. That moment, though small, felt like the first scene of a story of emotional infidelity. The kind no one talks about, but everyone feels. And deep down, I knew the universe has a curious way of answering the questions we don't dare ask aloud. Have you ever felt that? I heard the door creak. Before I even turned my head, my heart jumped, not out of fear, but from a pure, startled vulnerability. There was Daniel, frozen at the entrance of the bathroom, eyes wide, like he'd just witnessed something he wasn't meant to see. And yet, I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for a towel. Something deep within me chose stillness.
Chose truth.
In that moment, I felt more seen than I had in years. It wasn't planned. God, it was the farthest thing from seduction. But his gaze didn't drift toward my body. It lingered just above it, on my face, on my expression, on the ache I hadn't spoken aloud. That's the thing about an emotional affair. It often begins in silence, long before any touch. This wasn't lust. It was psychological intimacy, that intense, unsettling awareness that someone is truly seeing you beneath the layers. I broke the silence with a half smile, not flirtatious, but open, an invitation to honesty. You don't have to leave. I whispered, barely louder than the sound of running water. It wasn't an invitation for anything physical. It was permission.
Permission to stay.
To connect. To be real. To be vulnerable. Without fear of judgment. And that is something sacred. He stepped in slowly, like someone crossing into a different world. The air changed. Time slowed. There was no rush. No agenda. Just the hum of two people, caught between what's right and what's real. That moment became a female confession. I never said out loud, but one written in the silence between us. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered, what if neither of us turned away from this mirror? Not out of desire, but because for the first time, we both saw something worth staying for. After that night, everything changed, but not in the way you might think. It wasn't dramatic. No fireworks, just small, delicate moments that began to unfold between Daniel and me, like pages in a hidden diary. He lingered longer near me. I smiled more when he entered the room. We spoke less, but felt more. This was no ordinary infidelity story. It was the quiet beginning of something deeper, an emotional affair, soft and slow like a song you can't stop humming. One afternoon, I passed him a cup of coffee. Our fingers brushed. Just a second, but it sparked something soul deep. Like my body remembered what presence felt like. Not sexual, but soulful. That emotional intimacy began blooming in the spaces between words, in glances held just a second too long, in the quiet permission to exist without masks. That's the thing with a true emotional story. It's never about the touch. It's about the intention, the presence, the resonance. He listened in a way my husband hadn't in years, not just to what I said, but to what I didn't. And I found myself wanting to be more open, more raw, more real. With Daniel, I didn't feel like a wife or a mother. I felt like a woman. And the more I allowed myself to exist in that truth, the more I began to understand why infidelity narratives don't always come with guilt. Sometimes they come with clarity. What we shared wasn't just forbidden. It was grounding, like holding a secret that didn't feel like a sin, but like survival, a mirror, held up to everything I'd buried. And even though no one else could see it, I knew something sacred was being built between us. Quietly, respectfully, with no roadmap, but we both knew, even without saying a word, this path wasn't just forming beneath us. It was pulling us forward. And the real question wasn't if we'd cross a line. It was when. There's something hauntingly beautiful about being seen and seeing yourself through someone else's eyes. One night, I found myself standing in front of the mirror again. But this time, Daniel stood behind me, not touching, not speaking, just there. His presence felt like a whisper in the dark, a quiet confirmation that I wasn't alone. In this emotional unfolding, that mirror didn't just reflect my body, it reflected our emotional intimacy, our emotional affair, a silent one, and everything we weren't saying out loud. It's a strange thing, that duality. Seeing yourself as you are, and as you could be. In that reflection, I wasn't a traitor. I was a seeker, a woman starved, not of affection, but of psychological intimacy. I looked at him through the glass, and in his eyes, I saw understanding, that kind of knowing gaze that says, I feel it too. It was as if the mirror captured not just our bodies, but the sacred mirror symbolism of two souls navigating a forbidden connection.
We didn't need to speak.
His fingers brushed a strand of hair from my face, tender, slow, almost reverent, and I leaned into the moment like it was permission, not for lust, but for being. It was a pause from life, a cinematic freeze frame where the world fell away, and all that remained was this fragile, powerful connection. That's the paradox of a betrayal without betrayal. It's not about crossing a line. It's about realizing the line was crossed emotionally, long before. And as I met my own gaze in that glass, eyes wide, breath shallow, I felt something shift inside me, like the moment just before a wave crashes. We stood on that edge, not in fear, but in reverence. I didn't know what would come next, but in that stillness, in that reflection, I felt more honest than I had in years. And deep down, I knew the next step wouldn't just redefine our connection. It would redefine me. And maybe, for the first time in years, I had to ask, was that such a bad thing? We moved from the bathroom without saying a word, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Every step toward the bedroom felt like a step inward, like shedding layers of guilt and fear, and stepping into something softer, something safer. The air in the room held a quiet warmth, not of passion, but of permission. This wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about feeling, about honoring the depth of a connection that wasn't rooted in desire alone, but in emotional security. He didn't rush. I didn't expect him to. Every motion between us was slow, intentional, reverent, almost like a ritual. It wasn't just a touch. It was a voiceover, written in gestures, in glances,
In breath.
The room became a kind of sanctuary where guilt dissolved and only the moment mattered. There was no shame, only awareness, and that awareness held us like a blanket we didn't know we needed. For the first time in a long time, I felt chosen, not out of duty, but out of presence. Daniel wasn't trying to fix me, or save me, or solve anything. He was simply with me. That's what people don't understand about infidelity narratives. They expect scandal. They expect seduction. But sometimes, it's just two lonely hearts sharing a moment that exists beyond desire. In that bedroom, that unspoken truth wrapped around us both. When I laid beside him, I didn't feel like I was doing something wrong. I felt like I was finally telling the truth, without words, without explanation, just being. The room,
The bed.
the quiet between our heartbeats. It all became part of a larger emotional affair, one rooted in truth, not secrecy. And as we drifted into sleep, side by side. I knew the morning wouldn't erase what we'd found, but something, or someone, would soon remind us. Even sacred things don't stay hidden forever. The sound of the doorbell sliced through the silence like a blade. I sat up instantly, heart pounding, as if my entire body remembered the world. Outside that sanctuary, Daniel and I exchanged a glance, sharp, knowing, yet strangely calm. In that moment, reality reclaimed its place, and everything we had shared folded itself back into silence. The world hadn't changed, but we had. And now, we had to wear our masks again. He moved first, adjusted his shirt, ran a hand through his hair. With quiet precision, I pulled the blanket around me, not in shame, but in preparation. The emotional affair hadn't ended. It had simply been paused. That's the cruel rhythm of life after a silent affair. You learn to shift between truths. Like costumes, you become an expert at maintaining appearances, even when your soul is still trembling from what it just lived. I opened the door to my husband with a smile so practiced, it almost fooled me too. He kissed my cheek, unaware of the emotional betrayal that had taken root. Behind my eyes, it wasn't that I didn't love him. It's just, I no longer loved only him. And the weight of that realization settled over me like invisible fog. This is what people misunderstand about betrayal without betrayal. It's not always about the body. Sometimes it's about who you emotionally return to when no one's watching. Daniel stood in the hallway moments later, polite, composed, the image of innocence. My husband greeted him like a brother, and the three of us exchanged small talk, pretending the air wasn't thick with something unspeakable. As we laughed over nothing, I felt like I was watching my own life from the outside, a cinematic confession unfolding without dialogue. But beneath the surface, everything had already changed, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep pretending, or worse, what would happen if I stopped. The next evening, I found myself waiting, though I'd never admit it out loud. I moved through the house with practiced grace, but inside, a quiet storm was brewing. When Daniel returned, there was no hesitation, no startled silence, just a soft exchange of glances that said, "We're here again." But this wasn't a repeat. It was a deepening. What began as a silent affair had now become an emotional affair, with weight, with warmth, and something deeper than desire. He stepped into the room like he belonged there, not in a possessive way, but in a knowing one, and I welcomed him without words. There's a kind of surrender that doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like coming home. As he sat beside me, our shoulders brushed, and that simple contact carried the gravity of 1,000 unspoken truths. This wasn't just infidelity. This was emotional intimacy, at its most stripped and sincere. We didn't rush. We listened to each other, to the silence, to the rhythm of our breathing. Everything was slower now, intentional, respectful. The urgency had faded, replaced by presence. He told me about a dream he had. I told him about a fear I hadn't voiced in years. And in that exchange, we built a small, quiet world of trust. A true emotional story was unfolding, one no one else could see. but I felt it with every fiber of who I was, lying beside him again. I didn't feel the thrill of secrecy. I felt seen, cherished. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about recognition. And in that space between us, I found something I didn't even know I needed.
Peace.
But I also knew nothing in life remains untouched for long, especially not when you're living two truths at the same time, and the next truth would arrive smiling, wearing an apron, and serving a meal I no longer had the appetite for. Dinner that night was almost absurd. In its normalcy, the table was set, the lights were warm, the scent of roasted vegetables filled the air. My husband sat across from me, Daniel to his right. We laughed, shared stories, passed the salt. On the surface, it looked like a perfect evening, but inside, I was navigating a minefield of emotions. That's the thing about a silent affair. It teaches you how to smile through chaos with unnerving ease. My husband talked about his day, his plans for the weekend. I nodded, listened, even asked questions. Daniel chimed in with his usual charm, blending in effortlessly. And there I was, performing effortlessly, flawlessly. The emotional affair wasn't visible to anyone but me. It sat just beneath the surface, pulsing quietly, like a second heartbeat. I couldn't silence, but no one noticed. That's the danger of emotional betrayal. It doesn't leave marks, just memories. Every glance across the table was a secret. Every casual laugh, wrapped in restraint. I could still feel Daniel's presence from the night before, still hear his words echoing in the corners of my mind. And yet, I poured wine. I cleared plates. I kissed my husband goodnight. That duality? It's disorienting, like living two lives in one skin, a betrayal without betrayal. Because in the eyes of the world, I hadn't done anything wrong, but in my heart, everything had changed. What haunted me most wasn't what had happened. It was how easy it had become to maintain the illusion. That's when you realize the most dangerous lies are the ones you tell yourself
To keep the peace.
And as I turned out the lights that night, brushing my fingertips along the kitchen counter, like a ritual, searching for something solid, in a house built on silence, I knew something was building. Something that wouldn't stay hidden much longer, because some truths refuse to stay quiet. Now that you've heard it all, tell me something. How many times have you felt present, but invisible? How many times have you performed the perfect life, while your heart quietly begged for one honest glance? Emotional betrayal doesn't begin with a touch. It begins with silence, with everything you swallow, just to keep the peace, with absence disguised as routine. This story isn't just mine. It's a reflection of many, maybe yours too. So the question is, how long will you keep ignoring that mirror? How long will you keep calling coexistence love? You deserve to be seen, heard, chosen on purpose. Life is far too short to live it on autopilot. Tell me in the comments, have you ever lived a silent affair? Felt an emotional affair so deep it confused you more than any physical one ever could? Share your truth with me. Let's make this space a safe place to talk about what no one else has the courage to say out loud. And of course, if this touched you in any way, if it stirred something inside you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay with me on this journey of raw truths, real stories, and the kind of reflections that don't let you sleep the same. Because the next episode might not just be about me, it might be about you. Or worse, about someone you love and have no idea what they're feeling.